Coastal Imageries of Barbados, Santorini and Mykonos, an integrated analysis of authorship, media practice and theology. ISBN 978-976-9799745. Copyright 2026 by yours truly, Dr. William Anderson Gittins, Doctor of Divinity. Podcast 312. Welcome to the Cultural Coastline, a scholarly conversation about the places where land meets sea, where human meaning meets divine presence. I am your host, Dr. William Anderson Gittins, Doctor of Divinity, broadcasting from Bridgetown, Barbados, and today we are exploring a remarkable new work that bridges 3 coastlines, 2 oceans, and countless layers of meaning. On this journey is yours truly, Dr. William Anderson Gittins, Doctor of Divinity, whose integrated work as an author, publisher, photojournalist, podcaster, cinematographer, media arts specialist, and cultural theorist has produced the volume Coastal Imageries of Barbados, Santorini and Mykonos, an integrated analysis of authorship, media practice and theology, published under ISBN 978-976-9799745, copyright 2026. For the record, this isn't merely a collection of beautiful photographs. However, as I argue, these coastal images function simultaneously as documentary record, aesthetic composition, and theological witness. But today, we're going to unpack how. Let us begin with a fundamental philosophical question. What does it mean to see a coastline? In this context, I have decided as an author of this text in context to draw heavily on visual culture theory and specifically on John Burgess's seminal insight from ways of seeing that the way we see things is affected by what we know or what we believe. Burger, 1972, p. 8. All things being equal, it should be noted that the coast is never a neutral subject. When I frame a photograph of Barbados's Scotland district with its stratified coral limestone cliffs meeting the raw power of the Atlantic, I am not merely documenting geology. I am constructing a place. I am making an argument about what that place means, about its history, its resilience, its relationship to the divine. This is where my analysis departs from conventional tourism imagery. As Caribbean studies scholar Mimi Scheller 2003 has critiqued, the tourism industry often reduces coastal imagery to what she calls, I quote, sun, sea and sand, end quote, a reductive portrayal that erases the region's complex history of labor, survival and cross-cultural encounter. The Barbadian image disrupts that touristic gaze. The ruggedness of the landscape, its erosion, its survival against the relentless Atlantic indexes what Edora Glissant 1997 terms as poetics of relation. This is a landscape indelibly shaped by encounter, by the Middle Passage, by colonial extraction, and by the resilience of a people who have made meaning from these shores. That said, in my capacity as a photojournalist, let me take you across the Atlantic to the Cyclades, to Santorini and Mykonos. Here, the visual language shifts dramatically. Santorini presents vertically containment within the caldera. The iconic whitewash architecture cascades toward the sea, creating a sense of descent, of pilgrimage toward the water. Mykonos offers horizontally the human occupation of the shoreline, the waterfront promenade, the cubit architecture adapted to wind and sun. These differences matter, not just aesthetically, but theologically. As a Norwegian architectural theorist, Christian Norberg Schultz, 1980, argued, each environment possesses its own genius loci, its spirit of place. My lived experience as a media arts specialist recognizes that distinct environments demand distinct compositional choices in light, framing, and focal length to convey their unique character. It should be noted that in Barbados, I work with dynamic motion, the raw energy of breaking waves, and the drama of geology in motion. In Santorini, the caldera creates a sense of sacred enclosure, of being held within the earth's embrace. In Mykonos, I focus on the human scale, the ways people inhabit the shoreline, the thresholds between domestic life and the vast sea. This brings us to perhaps the most distinctive dimension of my work, the integration of theological reflection with visual media practice. As a doctor of divinity, I'm trained to read these coastal landscapes through the lens of ecotology. Christian theology has long conceptualized nature as liber natura, the book of nature, which exists alongside scripture as a source of divine revelation. Barbour, 1997. The coast, with its constant motion and boundary conditions, becomes a potent metaphor for divine immanence and transcendence. Consider the Barbadian image. The sheer power of the Atlantic visually enacts Psalm 93:4. I quote, "Mightier than the waves of the sea, they are forceful, is the Lord on high." End quote. The waves are not merely decorative, reminding the viewer of human vulnerability and dependence on a power greater than oneself. And in contrast, the calm Aegean Sea in the Santorini and Mykonos images evokes different biblical motifs. The, I quote, "still waters," end quote, of Psalm 23:2, the sea as a place of vocation and miracle as seen in Mark 4:39, where Christ calms the storm. Each coastline preaches a different sermon. This is where ecotology adds an urgent ethical dimension. As theologian Sally McFeig, 1993, argues, if the world is understood as God's body, then coastal erosion, over-tourism, and climate change are not merely environmental concerns, they are profoundly theological ones. This places a significant responsibility on the media practitioner. We are called not only to capture beauty, but to bear witness to fragility. The cultural theorists and the theologian converge here. As a cultural theorist and theologian, I converge on this scene. I've asked what these coasts are communicating about humanity's relationship to creation and to one another. My work extends beyond individual interpretation into community practice. This conversational research examines how coastal communities in both Barbados and the Cyclades use visual media for theological advocacy and cultural preservation. For island peoples, the coastline is not a border. It is an archive, a livelihood, and a place of encounter with the divine. In both Barbados and the Cyclades, the sea structures economy, spirituality, and daily rhythm. Bal Acino, 2008, Scheller, 2003. In Barbados, local ministries and independent photojournalists circulate images of the Atlantic coast during hurricane season and environmental campaigns, the photograph becomes sermon. When we image coastal erosion or coral bleaching, we are bearing theological witness to harm. This allows Barbadian faith communities to counter the tourism industry's reductive narrative with a theology of stewardship and covenant. In the Cyclades, Greek Orthodox practice remains intimately tied to the sea. Annual blessings of fishing boats, feast days at seaside chapels, and icons of St. Nicholas are regularly documented and shared through parish social media platforms. When these images are captioned with liturgical text or oral histories, they function as digital icons. During debates over tourism and environmental degradation, Cycladic clergy have released video messages filmed on the coasts calling for oikonomia, the orthodox concept of household management of creation. Visual media translates theology into civic advocacy. My integrated approach should raise important questions about authorship and representation. When you occupy multiple roles as an author, publisher, photojournalist, podcaster, culture theorist, and minister alike, I am influenced to ask the critical, open-ended philosophical question: how do I navigate the ethics of representation? Is the critical question. As Kress and Van Leeuwen 2006 argue, visual composition creates specific relationships between the viewer, the subject, and the context. The deliberate use of foreground elements, stone walls in Mykonos, terrace architecture in Santorini, vegetated cliff faces in Barbados, functions as a series of natural frames that guide the viewer's eye and embedded them within the scene. This thinking creates a sense of immediacy and participation. But it also raises the question: what story is being curated? Coastal imagery in the published form does not simply document, it argues. The coalition of Caribbean and Mediterranean coasts within a single volume suggests a deliberate transoceanic dialogue. This aligns with cultural theory that reads islandness as a condition of both isolation and profound connectivity. Baldacchino 2008. Barbados and the Cyclades are geographically distant, yet they are visually and symbolically linked through shared themes of insularity, faith, and the sea as both provider and threat. Let's talk about the future. My work identifies significant gaps in current scholarship, specifically the tendency to treat Caribbean and Mediterranean coastal imagery in isolation. Using the research lens, I have discovered that few studies bring these regions into comparative dialogue through the integrated lens of faith and media practice. I humbly submit that future research could productively examine how coastal communities in Barbados and the Cyclades use visual media for theological reflection, environmental advocacy, and cultural preservation. At this juncture, one can ask, and what about the practitioners who occupy multiple roles such as author, publisher, podcaster, and minister? My response is, we need more work on how such practitioners navigate the complex ethics of representation in an era of escalating climate crisis. This is not merely an academic question, it is a pastoral one and a prophetic one. My work suggests that visual media functions simultaneously as sermon, archive, and act of resistance. In the scheme of things, let me elaborate. When coastal people control the means of representation, they assert both theological claims about creation and cultural claims about belonging. In Barbados, community archives led by photojournalists, historians, and cultural theorists document fishing villages, coastal rituals, and the material culture of chattel houses near the shore. Barnes 2017. The emphasis on raw geology and vegetation resists resort aesthetic. It asserts a Barbados of labor, geology, and endurance. And in the Cyclades face depopulation and the loss of maritime skills. Cultural associations respond with visual projects documenting boat building, fishing practices, and the cubic architecture adapted to wind and sun. Leon Tindu 2010. When these images are paired with oral narration, they become pedagogical tools. Young creators add subtitles in Greek and English and distribute them through digital platform to reach the diaspora. Michael Herzfeld 2016 calls this, I quote, cultural intimacy, end quote, the performance of identity for insiders. By visually linking faith festivals to the fishing calendar, Cycladic communities argue that culture is not a museum piece, but a living theological practice tied to the sea. All things being equal, as we conclude, what do I hope readers and viewers take from my work is that they come to see that the coastal images of Barbados, Santorini, and Mykonos are far more than scenic postcards. Read through the integrated lens of authorship, media production, culture theory, and theology. They emerge as rich texts that speak of geology, history, beauty, and responsibility. They invite us to see the coast not only with the camera, but with the imagination and with reverence. As both document and devotion, such as imagery, reminds us that every shoreline is a liminal place where the human and the divine, the temporal and the eternal converge. In an era of rising seas and shifting shores, the ability of coastal communities to control their own visual narratives will determine what is remembered, what is valued, and what is saved. I am Dr. William Anderson Giddens, Doctor of Divinity. Thank you for joining me on this profound conversation. May we all learn to read the coast with new eyes. You've been listening to The Cultural Shore, a scholarly conversation about coastal imageries and their theological, cultural, and media dimensions. Today's discussion was based on the work Coastal Imageries of Barbados, Santorini, and Mykonos, an integrated analysis of authorship, media practice, and theology. ISBN 978-976-9799745. Copyright 2026 by yours truly, Dr. William Anderson Giddens, Doctor of Divinity. Podcast 312. For further reading, we recommend the work cited in this conversation: Berger's Ways of Seeing, Scheller's work on Caribbean tourism, Glissant's Poetics of Relation, Mafig's Ecological Theology, and Herzfeld's Studies of Greek Cultural Intimacy. Until next time, may you see every shoreline as a place of encounter with history, with community, and with the divine. God bless.